Well, it's interesting because I mean there are 2 points. Because I want to get to that interracial coalition, because on some level we saw I think at least in New York, if I remember correctly, it was Occupy that first organized the first hoodie march, at least in New York, and where there was an attempt to draw the economic issues into a sort of a broader narrative. And but before we get to that, I want to go back because when we talk about this co-optation of a radical tradition within African American politics, prior to the election, we had Glenn Ford on from Black Commentator, and he was arguing that in his greatest argument, I think, was that President Obama was even because using the formation of a lesser of two evils, which I certainly subscribe to on just an array of issues relative to Mitt Romney, but he said that that President Obama was not the lesser of two evils, but a more perfect evil, in the sense that he was co-opting this energy from a tradition of black progressivism, black radicalism, that to the detriment of the broader progressive radical struggle in terms of economics. And you've hinted at that those type of claims, those type of perspectives are very difficult to articulate within the context of the black community. I mean, because and for some reasons that are obvious, but talk a little bit more about that, because I think
I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
It's hard, and I think it's hard for a number of different reasons, and we have to be careful in how we make this point, right? Because in some ways, what happens is that people become so Obama obsessed that it short circuits kind of nuanced analysis, right? And so there's the assumption that if you are critical of the current situation, current lack of policy, from the Beltway, or just simply the general state of Black America, that you are in some ways engaged in a criticism of Obama's failings, right? And part of what we have to do, given Republican recalcitrance, given the fact that racism is still alive and well, is somehow circle the wagons around him, right? And so everything becomes, the gravitational pull of Obama is such that everything becomes about him. Even when we're talking about, the devastation in the jobs market, even when we're talking about the criminal justice system and rates of incarceration, or what Michelle Alexander calls the new Jim Crow, when we just start going through the data and seeing all the hell that black people are catching, if we call attention to this, then it becomes implicitly or explicitly a criticism of Obama. And in some ways it is.
Right.
But in some ways it has little. It isn't just simply about this guy, right? I've said in public before, I can give less than a damn that we have a black president in the White House, right? I'm really looking for policies that really can address the conditions of the most poor and the most vulnerable, right? So part of the challenge has been this sense that the public space in Black America, the deliberative space, has contracted precisely because, and here's the irony, Sam, a kind of identity politics polices, right, what you can say and what you can't say.
Right.
That is to say, some people on the one hand will dismiss identity politics as like this bad stuff. You just can't walk around thinking that black people, because they're black, should be in solidarity with one another, right? But at the same time, there's this kind of implicit identity politics around how we should defend President Obama. And in my mind, you can't defend drones. It's just hard to do,
right?
Especially when you were critical during the Bush administration. Right. You can't defend, right, NSA. Right? You can't defend the policies that have defended Wall Street and left Main Street broke, right? And it seems to me that you lose all your moral authority to bring critique to bear on anyone coming after President Obama. So for me, and here is really the point that I think you're reaching for. President Obama has established the way in which future presidents will deal with race for the next generation. So the way black folk have held the state, have engaged the state up until this moment, right, it has completely been arrested because people have compromised their principles in defense of this guy. Does that make sense?
Absolutely, and it seems it's obviously it's incredibly problematic, and it also seems. I mean, when you talk about the identity politics, I mean, on one hand, because we're talking about sort of a clash between sort of like political, cultural aspects of life that are political and policy aspects of life that are political. I mean, for instance, I mean, in the context of, I really believe that one of the best things that has happened to the LGBT community over the past 10, 15 years is the idea of celebrities, of sports figures, coming out, of television shows, even sitcoms, portraying gay people as people, as opposed to the butt of a joke. And that has had great implications in changing our culture, which we are now seeing the payoff in terms of policy. We are starting to see the expansion of human rights for gay people. And this seems to be the sort of the tension that exists with President Obama, because clearly, there is an importance to the notion of an African American being president, and just as there will, hopefully in the future, to a woman being president. But that does not necessarily mean that from a policy standpoint we've caught up, and in some ways it cuts against any progress on a policy level because it almost gets a pass. That like this is enough. The cultural sort of from a cultural perspective, things have progressed. But when the cultural perspective progresses, and we don't see it reflected in policy, it begins to undercut the impetus for policy.
Right. I mean, so it's one thing for the president to sing Al Green, to sing an Al Green song in Harlem, but it's another thing for us to get some specific policies to address, right, the conditions of folks on the ground. So, I mean, we know the crack cocaine disparity, right, that has led to the imprisonment of thousands of black folk. And you see those folks recognizing that there was discrimination, there was bias inherent in crack cocaine and powder cocaine sentencing disparity, but the Justice Department comes through the back door and argues against these folk being released or having their sentences reduced. So you can sing Al Green on the one hand, but what are the policies on the ground? What are the policies on the ground? You can give a great speech about Trayvon Martin could have been your son or it could have been me, but what are the substantive, significant policy issues that go beyond just simply private public partnerships and entertainers and preachers and athletes coming together to do something for black boys, right? Or have we searched our hearts to see if we have given up our prejudices so that we can interact with one another? What are the concrete policies to prevent the murder of a child, right? And so when you say, when progressives get caught up in symbol, when those, and these shorthands are troublesome, progressive, radical, whatever. When people who are principled get caught up in symbol, we oftentimes find ourselves, Sam, compromising those principles that serve as cornerstones for who we take ourselves to be. And it seems to me that so many folks have, to paraphrase, the autobiography of an ex-colored man, so many people have sold their souls for a mess of pottage. Right? And what we see around us is just devastation. I mean, poor people, the most vulnerable, and particularly vulnerable children, are catching hell.
I
right?
mean,
Are
people can look
catching
around. I mean,
hell.
we can see what's going on in Detroit. We can see what's happened
Exactly.
with Rahm Emanuel shutting down 50 schools, and then basically
Philadelphia is doing the same thing, right?
exactly. And we're seeing this in Philly as well in terms of attacks on public education. So I mean, give me your sense. I mean, this is a hard question, but I mean, and aside from the sort of the corrosiveness of people not maintaining their principles through this time. What happens? What are and because you're obviously on a daily basis you're engaging in black political thought. When you look at the way that things are organizing, what happens when President Obama is ex-President Obama? I mean, where do I know this is a tough one because this is something that
Wow.
I try and think about just in terms of sort of from a political standpoint, and I'm curious from your perspective, what happens at that point? I mean, do suddenly the energy that has been sort of the cross currents sort of meld into a more unified current, or what happens?
Well,
That may be a
all
big
hell's going to break
question.
loose. We think we're in dark times now. What the future holds? I was talking with my good friend Cornel West, and he made a point, and I've been struggling with it, that we may be witnessing the end of Black America as we know it. And
what does that mean? I mean, what does that?
What does that mean? Is that the traditional ways in which the story or the stories of our sojourn in this country, the ways in which we stood as the moral voice of the nation in some ways, the way in which we have been in but not of the country, and how that status has informed our critique and the way in which we reared our children and our children's children. All of this is changing as we find ourselves more and more included into the mainstream of American life as it is, not transformed, but as it is. So you have a strata of Black America that is as included and as American as apple pie. And it's not a small strata. There's a growing number of folks. And at the same time, you have a group of folks who are so locked out, so marginalized, so isolated, living in hyper-concentrated and hyper-segregated pockets of poverty, that it becomes difficult for them to imagine the next day or to imagine tomorrow. So the way in which the way in which we've been socialized into understanding who we are as Black folk in the United States is changing. And what that's going to look like, particularly post-Obama. In my worst moments, Sam, I say that this administration has had as much of an effect on Black politics as the Reagan administration. It has had that kind of effect on changing the scope and nature of Black political redress. And we've yet to wrap our minds around it. And we're not going to see its impact until the next administration, whether it's Hillary Clinton or Cruz or Rubio or Biden or whomever. We won't see its effects until we have to engage the next administration. And the question will be, how will we engage them? What will be the languages we will use? So to answer your question in shorthand, it's going to get even darker for how we imagine African American politics. And my thinking is that we have to shift to the local. We have to turn our attention away from the national stage as the point of entry and begin to do what we're seeing like in North Carolina with Moral Mondays.
Right.
We have to begin to see what's going on in Florida with those young folk. We have to turn to the local, and that must be our purge. And that's the best of the organizing tradition as I understand it.
And I wonder
if
that also doesn't, I mean, if that story changes and the way that the relationship that Black folk have to their sense of who they are in America changes, if that doesn't then maybe leave room for more of that coalition building, like we're seeing in North Carolina in many respects, of economic justice issues. And I mean, because I think, one of the things that seems to be happening in North Carolina is that the issues that are on the plate are issues that are affecting poor people, middle class people. Affect their economic issues, education issues that speak to black people because of their situation, and I think in the context of voting it may be a little bit different, frankly, but not as much because they are black.
But see, the thing is that we need to understand that the best of the black freedom struggle tradition, Sam, was never just simply about black people.
Right.
The best of the black freedom struggle was about justice. And when we think about what the best of the black freedom struggle made possible, right? We're not only talking about rights for workers. We're talking about rights for women. We're talking about rights for undocumented workers. The best of the black freedom struggle, right, opened doors for LGBT community. So when we're talking about the voicing, right, of our demands for freedom, our sense of what American democracy ought to be. I mean, for me, the best voicing of this is, of course, in the writing of James Baldwin, right? It's always about a certain kind of reimagining of America. So what we see in North Carolina having its beginnings, right, in these voter ID laws, these efforts to disenfranchise black folk, or what we saw with Darian Moray with the Million Hoodie March and how it linked up with the Occupy movement, right? When we see these sorts of connections, what we do know is that the best of the black freedom struggle gives voice to a conception of democracy that cuts across race, class, gender, sexual orientation, that speaks to the best of us. And part of my worry is that struggle has been hijacked by self-interested persons, right, who are eyeing, right, getting a better footing among the powers that be.
Indeed.
And leaving the most vulnerable behind, if that makes sense. I know that's a harsh thing to say.
It makes sense.
But I think it's what I feel in my heart.
I share that concern. Professor Eddie Glaude from Princeton, thanks so much for your time today. Really appreciate it. Fascinating stuff.
It's always great to talk with you, Sam.